Have you ever wondered what your intelligence agencies get up to? Well, here in Canada, CSIS, our domestic intelligence agency, releases an annual report. So I've just been going through the 2024 annual report. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. If you can get past the government speak, there's a lot of really interesting information about how CSIS is approaching the national threat space, right? The national security threat space, which would be counterintelligence. There's a section on cybersecurity and also obviously counterterrorism. Now, the section I want to talk about today is when you drill down into the counterterrorism section, they talk about the different categories of motivated violent extremism. And so they have these definitions like religiously motivated, ideologically motivated, politically motivated. They talk about Canadian extremist travelers, and they also talk about youth radicalization. Now, when in terms of the ways to be motivated to violent extremism, like you may be thinking, well, what's the difference between political or ideological? And it's clear from the report that CSIS is also struggling with those questions. It's not easy to put people in clear buckets anymore and identify exactly how they're going to become radicalized based on the kinds of belief systems they're becoming radicalized about. So one of the things they say here is that threat actors are increasingly driven by a range of often seemingly contradictory grievances, ideas, and highly personalized narratives from across ideological spectrums that are often deeply intertwined with conspiracy theories. So to me, that's fascinating because this idea of you have contradictory beliefs, and I'm going to leave it up to you to think about what those might be. And those are motivating you to commit violent extremism. Like, how do you get motivated to commit extremism if your beliefs themselves are creating a huge cognitive dissonance because they are contradictory? The other really interesting thing in the report is CSIS talks a lot about the utilization of online platforms, especially in the youth space. Applications such as Discord, Telegram, Roblox, Minecraft. And I mean, as a parent reading that, I'm like, oh my God, my kids are on at least 2 of those. And I think a lot of parents are in the same boat. So it goes to show how pervasive this stuff is and how, and I think that's why a lot of the radicalization can end up in that contradictory space, because it's not, how it used to be before the internet, which is that you'd have to know somebody in the club and you'd have to learn about their beliefs in order to join that club. Well, now you're getting hit from all different sources through different types of media. And so the radicalization is the thing, and the different beliefs that underpin it, well, they are shifting depending on the media that you're exposed to. So I think this is really interesting. And the reason I wanted to share this today is take a look at the report. It's really, really cool, but also because it seems to be really, really relevant. Right now in Canada, we've had, a couple news stories in the last months that have been really disturbing. There was the kid from British Columbia, 17-year-old who, ended up in Poland thinking he was going to spy for the Russians and got freaked out by that and confessed and is now in a Polish jail. There's also the news that happened this week of 4 members of the Canadian military staging some violent or planning to stage some violent extremism actions to take over land outside of Quebec City. So these are really relevant issues, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that CSIS is dealing with in its counterterrorism. And the reason I wanted to bring up this section today is to say that, counterterrorism is a huge part of what intelligence agencies do. And doing counterterrorism is, you have to understand what underpins the desire to commit terrorism. And in this day and age, as this report is showing, it's getting harder and harder to have clear lines. I was talking to somebody who used to work at CSIS and said that CSIS is pretty good at identifying who might become radicalized. But of course, becoming radicalized in and itself is not a crime. It's when you take that radicalization and move into violent acts. And CSIS is having a really hard time identifying who, once they're radicalized, will actually move into that violent extremism space. So it's an ongoing challenge. Anyway, I think it's a super interesting topic. If there's any questions you have, I'm going to do other videos on the report itself. There's lots of interesting sections like cybersecurity and counterintelligence, but I thought this one really, really timely. So yeah, hit me with your comments or questions. And otherwise, I hope everyone's doing okay.